Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws. This is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. We've been ripping through these teams and their offseason breakdowns. I mean, we've been really zooming through them. But now we're going back to our, duo double team format. So, we're closing out the Atlantic Division with our two final teams from this division, two powerhouse squads. I'm sure you guys can guess what they are. But before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and X at the OBT Podcast for updates.
Yeah, so we got, for the last two teams of the Atlantic Division, we got the Boston Celtics and the Philadelphia 76ers. So we're going to start off with the Boston Celtics. So obviously, we know what happened with them. They had high expectations going into last season. They had gone to the finals the year before, lost to the Warriors in six. But, after, several years of deep playoff runs, it felt like that they were kind of on the verge of finally finding something real, in terms of making it to the finals. They started the year off really, really good. I mean, they looked like the most dominant team in the league, powered by their offense being a lot better than the year before, which was really kind of a weakness for them. Especially, come playoff time, right? We all remember the stretches in the finals, right, where they would have, a lot of turnovers or just, a lot of possessions where the offense would bog down, right? But, then they went into the offseason. They got Malcolm Brogdon, right? They did improve on the offensive end. They lost Ime Udoka, obviously. We know what happened there, right? And
Yeah.
Joe Mazzulla took over. Um, and it looked fine for most of the regular season. Then they had a stretch where it didn't really look great. And there was a little bit of concern because I even remember at the time, I think, in one of our podcasts, you had a prediction that you thought that they could go out in the first round.
Yeah. And they
Even
almost
though they
did.
did make it out of the first round, it wasn't, you didn't feel great about it, right? Because I think that was the 6 game series against the Hawks, right? Then they went 7 against the Sixers, who we'll talk about, in a minute. And then they lost to the Heat, right?
Yeah.
So and that Heat series was just really bizarre, right? Because we thought the Celtics were going to win, and then we found them down 3-0, and we after they were down 3-0, we were kind of doing a off-season look for them, because we assumed their season was over.
Sure.
They did end up tying the series, and they got it to a game 7, but they still ended up not being able to come through. Um, I know Tatum did get hurt in the first minute or so of the game, but regardless, it just felt like, there's a reason why nobody's ever come back from 3-0, just because you have to basically be perfect for 4 straight games. And, in a way, they were kind of fortunate that they got to a game 7 because game 6, that was the Derek White putback, basically right at the
Yeah.
buzzer,
That was
the last.
lucky, man.
Yeah. And we knew that and we talked about it at the time when they were down 3-0, that they were going to do something. We felt that there was no way they were going to go into, this upcoming season with the exact same roster. And they ended up making a really significant trade, right? So as everybody knows by this point, right, they went after Kristaps Porzingis, right? Former Knick, former Dallas Maverick, former Wizard, right? And I guess some of this you'll be able to speak on, just because you saw
Sure.
him play for the Wizards. But, he actually did have a pretty good season, for the Wizards last year. I know
Yeah.
they ended up not really being that great, but he had one of his best years, in a while. He was also very healthy. I believe he played in about 65 games. And,
Yeah.
I think a lot of the games that he missed towards the back end, I think it was due to illness, right?
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, right? Because they were kind of like, sort of tanking towards the end.
Yes.
Averaged 23 a game, 8 rebounds, 50 from the field, 39 from three, right? Played really good defense. I think he averaged about a block and a half a game. So he had a really good season for the Wizards, and we'll see what he does for Boston. But this was their big move essentially, right? They brought him in. They sent their longtime leader Marcus Smart over to the Grizzlies, right? And they got back a couple of picks for Marcus Smart. I believe they got one from the Warriors that the Grizzlies had, I think, in the Iguodala trade, and another one that I think was the Grizzlies' own pick. And I think Boston ended up trading that pick, right? If I'm not mistaken, they did draft Jordan Walsh, in the first round, but still. But this was essentially their big powerhouse move, right? They did, sign a few guys, right? I think they brought in from the Pacers. I think it was O'Shea Brissett, and I think the other day they brought in Lamar Stevens from Cleveland. I think Delano Banton from Toronto. But by and large, most of the rest of the roster, was just kind of the same guys.
Right.
Um, but either way, um, this does really change their team because again, Smart was the longest tenured Celtic. He had been there, I think, for basically a decade at this point, right? I think he was in the the Giannis draft, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not mistaken, that was in
Yeah.
2013. Basically,
He
yeah,
was
10
drafted
years.
by him.
Yeah, exactly. So pretty much had seen it all in terms of what the Celtics were and what they became. And again, he was their big leader, one of their best defensive players. So this is a huge transition for them. And again, like we thought at the time, when they were on the verge of being swept by Miami, like that this couldn't continue. Just in the sense of like somebody had to go, somebody was going to take some of the fall for it. It wasn't going to be the coach because they had just hired him. And it was Marcus Smart. And it's funny because initially it wasn't supposed to be
Right.
actually. Supposed to
Brogdon.
be Malcolm Brogdon, who was going to the Clippers, but that trade ended up falling through. I think in the last hour or so because Brogdon failed his physical. So as a result, they kind of had to scramble, I guess, and they ended up choosing Marcus Smart. And for me personally, I would have preferred if it was Brogdon.
Me too.
Um, but at the same time, like I said, we thought that one of those guys was gonna go. Um, but now they have a lot more size, to mess around with, right? Obviously, I know some people have talked about what his role is gonna be. He's obviously gonna start. It's not gonna come off the bench. They didn't trade, for a $30 million guy to come off the bench.
Right.
Um, that leaves them to decide between either Horford or Robert Williams. I mean, I would think, given Horford's age and the mileage on him at this point, he'd be the guy coming off the bench. And Robert Williams would start. And, maybe it might just depend on the matchup. Coaches don't normally change the starting lineup like from game to game, but, um, there is a
Playoffs,
lot.
yeah, but not in the
Right.
regular season.
Right, exactly. In the playoffs, they do, just not so much in the regular season.
Yeah.
So, it like there is a decent amount of flexibility there, right? Because Porzingis does bring, like I said, he brings size, he brings shooting. Again, the main thing is that can he do it in the playoffs, right? Because he hasn't really been like in a lot of playoff environments. New York wasn't a playoff team when he was there. Dallas was, right? But at the same time, one of those years, I believe he got hurt.
Yes.
Towards the middle part of that series. I think it was the bubble series against the Clippers where he actually did play well. And then the second matchup against the Clippers, he was kind of maligned because he didn't play very well. Um, they took advantage where like they ran some like really small lineups because he wasn't really a threat like around the basket as like a post up guy. And I think he kind of patched that up in Washington. To
Yes, he
add
did.
more, of a post bag to his game, which he does need because again at that size, you can't just necessarily just jack up three after three, like we mentioned with Wenbanyama. So, again, that's the Celtics are putting all their eggs in this basket, and it's definitely a gamble. Like I don't think this is necessarily a home run, only because again, I think he still has some question marks in terms of what is he going to bring to you come playoff time. Obviously, he's a big injury risk, even though he was pretty healthy last year. He got hurt this offseason. I think in the World Cup, he didn't even play.
Yeah.
With with plantar fasciitis, so he's already hurt. So that's not necessarily a good sign. Um, and then the other question would be what happens with Brogdon, right? There had been a report from a guy that covers the Celtics, Gary Washburn, if I'm not mistaken, where he said that Brogdon hadn't really communicated with the Celtics, right, since like, the offseason or whatever. So, does he I mean, there are other rumors suggesting he's not going anywhere right now, and maybe the injury concern from him as well, right, might be a reason why a team didn't trade for him. That's why the Clippers didn't pick him up. So, now you got I guess you kind of have that hurdle you have to kind of figure out your way around. So I don't know. Like again, I understand, the reasoning and the decision to, make a drastic change. I still think they'll be pretty good, but I don't know. This, like I said, this is a huge gamble because again, like this really does change a lot of what Boston, really does. I mean, like I said, I think it is an offensive upgrade for sure, but again, you're gonna have to play different defense with Porzingis. I don't think he can switch as much, with him out there because he can only really do drop, because he's not really like a guy that can switch on to smaller players like that. So
Sure.
I don't know. I mean, I guess in about 5 seconds or so, you can kind of tell me what you think. But I don't know. Like, I'm not super high on this move. I don't really
Hmm.
hate it, but I think it's really a question mark. Just but again, like when you're a team that's trying to contend, sometimes you make these question mark moves, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, and for me, I contrary to you, actually, I kind of on the other side of the spectrum. I'm pretty high on it. Now that I've had time to kind of let it sit there and marinate like that, I feel like this is a better move than I initially thought. I think this is a win now move for sure. I think they just want somebody that can bring some versatility. And we've seen that, when Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum kind of struggle, there's nobody really there to pick up the slack. So hopefully I think Porzingis could potentially be that third option to pick up slack. And then, they got rid of some, I'm going to say offensive liabilities in my opinion. I think, Grant Williams is an offensive liability, but that's just my opinion. Marcus Smart sometimes also was an offensive liability as well. I'm not a fan of his shot selection sometimes. I'm not a fan of Porzingis' shot selection at times either. He tends to favor that three a lot when he should be in the low post going for easy hooks or, fades, whatever the case may be. But he just wants to jack up threes. But at the same time, I'm pretty high on this move because I think it will add a lot of scoring versatility. Like you said, though, the defense is definitely a question mark because, like you said, Porzingis, we already know he's a great rim protector. He's just a horrible perimeter defender just because he's so slow. But, the length and size, I think, will help. But I think if he's playing along somebody like Robert Williams, I think that will be great because I think in Dallas, he played a lot of center. And then I think if he was at the four, I'm pretty sure it was Dwight Powell who was next to
Yeah,
him.
or like Boban. I think
Yeah,
they
so
also
it's like
try to
weird lineups like that. And then in DC, he played with
Gafford, right?
Gafford, yes, who's not like a crazy rim protector. He's more of like a rebounder, in my opinion, athletic big, but not
Right.
like, a solid rim protector. I think Robert Williams is definitely a better fit in terms of what you would want in a front court, I guess. And it's like,
Mm.
I think it's just intriguing to me because they have a lot of size now, and I really like that. I think that's something that we've seen with Denver. We saw that their formula was just to kind of bully everybody that they played against. So hopefully, the Celtics can have some sort of rotation where it's pretty much all big guys. Because I think what they say Jalen Brown plays the three, Jason Tatum
Yeah.
more the four. So I'm not sure what the real starting lineup's going to be, but say Jalen Brown moves up to the two, Jason Tatum to the three, Porzingis at the four, and then Robert Williams at the five. That's a really intriguing lineup. I really
Yeah.
like this. Um, the question remains with the point guard position for the Celtics. I think, like you said, Malcolm Brogdon's future with the squad is up in the air, but I think Derek White is definitely the better player at this point. I think we saw that in the playoffs, maybe not so much in the regular season because Malcolm Brogdon did win Sixth Man of the Year, but I think Derek White is the better player in general. So I wouldn't really mind him starting. I think he brings a little bit more, and he's also a little bit more durable as we've seen as well. But I really like this move. They did lose, I guess, some quote unquote depth, but at the same time, I feel like sometimes you can have that trade off where you can gain some skill and sacrifice a little bit of depth at some positions that don't really help you
Because of
offensively.
the star power.
Exactly. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the way that I'm looking at it. But I'm higher on the move, I think, than you are. But in
Yeah.
general, I do understand your points completely.
Derek White's definitely going to be the starting point guard for
Oh yeah, for
sure,
sure.
but
Yeah.
Brogdon will be the sixth man. So now this is kind of White's chance, to kind of like, shake things up because again,
Right.
he's been a pretty productive player for the Celtics. Last year I think a lot of Celtics fans and just people who watch the Celtics, yeah, at least somewhat in general, I think felt like White was the better player last year than Smart.
Absolutely.
Not that Smart wasn't necessarily good, but I think defensively kind of took a step back. Um, but White at times in the playoffs, sometimes he was there, sometimes he wasn't. But the main thing is again defensively, he's excellent, as a guard defender, right? Especially even as like a shot blocker, which you don't normally
Sure.
see from, the guard position, right?
Mhm.
Um, so he can do that. Like I said, I think that's kind of where, they're gonna lean into is the, having Brown and Tatum right as like a 2-3. And then like I said, I think Porzingis and Robert Williams is your front court with White in there. Like and obviously you can always go smaller as well, right? Like they'll have lineups, I'm sure, where like you said, Tatum's at the four and Brown's at the three. And then, obviously you could have like, Horford at the, five or something
Sure.
like that, right? Or that's the main thing. These other wings that they picked up, I feel like one of them ideally, like, probably should hit, like just in order to give Tatum or Brown, like, like 2 or 3 minutes, or possessions or something where they can kind of just chill, since they're, regardless of Porzingis, they're going to be the main, creators and drivers of the offense.
Yeah.
Um, and the thing with, in fairness, like Tatum has become a better playmaker passer. So, because we do know that the Celtics' weakness, has kind of been like, the lack of like a real floor general, like, playmaker, table setter late in games. I think
Right.
that was the week 2 seasons ago. And I think last year that was a problem as well. They
Yeah.
still don't really have that. Like I said, Tatum has definitely grown leaps and bounds as a passer. So, and you would probably want the ball in his hands anyways late in games just because he's their best player. And he's, obviously a terrific offensive player in addition to what he does on defense. So,
Yeah,
um, it's just, like I said, I think it can work. It's just, I just feel like, we're going to have to definitely see, some real changes from what the Celtics normally do. You know what I mean? Because, like, they've done the two big lineup a lot before because they had Horford and Robert Williams, but Porzingis is a little bit different than Horford just because, like you said, he's a lot bigger. Just brings a different element to the game.
sure.
At this point, he's obviously the better player. So we'll see. But like I said, I'm not necessarily low on it because again, it's like the Eastern Conference is in a funny spot where it's like, it doesn't really feel like there's a clear cut team, that's like head and shoulders above everyone else right now. It felt like, you know, going into the playoffs, you thought it would be the Bucks. And then they went out in the first round. So then you felt that like, the Celtics might be it. And then they went out, against Miami. But Miami, when we'll get to them later, right? They're to me, right, at least as of right now, not really any better than they were last year.
Right.
So you and then with the Bucks, I think there's some real questions just in terms of the age of some of those guys, and it just seems like they just haven't been able to have fully healthy stretches together. So I still think, regardless, the Celtics will still be good. I just got to see, like what happens this postseason because last season it didn't really end well. Like it'd be one thing if like they hadn't gone to the finals before, and then you're like, oh well, that was just kind of like a blip. But I don't know. Last year was really just strange, and with Joe Mazzulla, he was a young coach, right? He was, I think, the youngest head coach in the NBA. So they did give him some extra assistance this time around. So we'll see if he can kind of grow there as well. Because that was the other tough part, right? Losing Ime Udoka, who was really good, and it seemed like he had a really good connection to the players, where it seemed like they, kind of like it felt like sort of like what Darvin Ham is for the Lakers, where it's like
Sure.
they want to play hard for him. They want to run into a wall for him, basically do, what he asks, right? And like I said, I think at times he was really their tough guy, right? I still don't necessarily feel like the Celtics have like the, that tough physicality guy right now,
Especially
but
since they
you know,
lost Smart too.
right,
And that,
but at the same time, again, they do have a lot of talent. They do have a lot of skill. So I don't really see a reason to like necessarily doubt that they're going to be good. Like I don't like they're not going to have like a horrible season, I don't think necessarily.
they're going to be
It's just
top two in the East again.
right. Yeah. It's just the main question is can they get past, these teams in the East and get to the finals, and then ultimately win the title? Because that's what they're going to be judged on now. Now
Yeah.
that they were able to get to the finals and show, that hey, we can be really good. Um, like now that's the goal.
Right.
With and then the other thing we didn't even mention yet, right? Jalen Brown, right? He had signed that huge, super max extension, right? $300 million basically over 5 years. Um, so that's also something that I think is kind of intriguing as well, where it's like, is he going to play out his whole contract in Boston? I mean, like right now, he's not going to go anywhere. I don't think you can usually trade players once they sign an extension for like a year or whatever. But either way, like that wasn't going to be the shakeup, right? Like
Right.
they're going to pay him eventually. I think Tatum either this upcoming offseason or next will be
I
up
think it's the
for,
next.
uh, yeah, next one, yeah, the supermax extension as well. And I think he'll be getting a little bit more. Um, so, then you're kind of locked into that roster essentially because you'll be, way into the tax. You'll have two guys, that are really good, and then you kind of have to figure out what else fits around them.
And
So
they need to
this is
stop
kind of like I
disappearing
think
in the playoffs too, because
right. So
some of
that's
them are a little bit shaky.
yeah, and that's the thing. So this is kind of now the next phase of this Celtics team where it's like now, they have established themselves as a championship caliber team. Despite what happened last year, they're still a championship caliber team, I believe. Um, even if
Yeah.
I'm not as high on the Porzingis trade, I think they can still win the chip. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah,
So it's
it's
like,
possible.
yeah, exactly. So now it's a matter of, what can you do in terms of building around that duo, right? Because that is the present and the future of this team ultimately. So you have to figure out how to optimize them. So we'll see, how this goes. But like I said, I do think Derek White does fit really well with the starters, because again, I don't think defensively you have to change a whole lot.
Right.
In terms of White versus Smart, I think Smart is probably better against bigger players than Derek White. But Derek White can still help you, lock down the other guards. And you still have like Brown and Tatum who can, help, either the backcourt or the wing. So I mean,
Sure.
like, we'll see. But they do have a lot of optionality there, right? So like, because again, they don't have to, run the same thing every single game. They have multiple guys that can do a lot of different things, and that's how they want their team to be. So it's a matter of again, can Porzingis contribute in the playoffs? Because so far we haven't really seen, he doesn't have like a consistent history of that. Because I thought, like I said, the first year for Dallas, he was pretty good in the playoffs in the bubble. He just got hurt. And then the next year it wasn't so great. And then Dallas traded him, right? And then they ended up being a better team. But then, like I said, he was pretty good for the Wizards last year. Maybe it was just because it was a contract year. We'll see. But,
Yeah,
um,
he was our
you know,
best player in my opinion at times. So
yeah, so that's the main thing. Can he be healthy and can he contribute, right? And can he not, have issues with the guys? Because it seemed like he and Luca eventually kind of had some issues where I guess they kind of like were kind of figuring out like, hey, your turn, my turn, but he's gonna have to sacrifice some more, right? Because Tatum and Brown are the guys on this team, so there's gonna be some nights where he's not gonna get like a ton of shot attempts.
sure.
He's gonna have to play more of a support role. So if he can do that right? Then I think the Celtics, are going to get the best version out of him, right? In terms of like unlocking and optimizing all the things he can do really well, right? But if not, I don't know. But either way, like I said, I don't hate the trade. I just it did kind of confuse me. It was not at all something I expected, because
Right.
this was not like something that was even like really considered or rumored until like the day it happened, basically.
Yeah, I didn't think the Wizards were going to trade him to the Celtics. I was like,
Right.
okay, cool.
Yeah, 'cause we knew Porzingis was probably on the way out.
Yes,
Once Beal was, once Beal was sent out. But the Celtics, that one definitely surprised me. I did
sure.
not expect the Celtics, to pick up Porzingis. Like I figured they would do something, but of the possible moves they could have done, I'm like Porzingis wouldn't have been like in my, radar of moves. But that's the cool thing about the NBA is that like, sometimes these deals just come out of nowhere. And sometimes, these deals are the difference between, winning a championship or not, right? Because
Yeah,
if Boston wins the championship this year, Porzingis is gonna be one of the reasons why, or at the very least, the
a
trade
factor.
for acquiring him is gonna be one of the reasons why. Like I said, they
Absolutely.
can do it. Especially because in the Eastern Conference, again, I don't feel like there's like a surefire team where it's like they can't beat this team. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like even the Bucks, like they have beaten the Bucks, even though Middleton was hurt. But still, like
It's
they could
doable.
beat any of those teams. It's just a matter of again, like I said, can Porzingis do it in the playoffs?
Right.
So I mean,
Yeah.
so I guess, in terms of, what grade would you give the Celtics, for their offseason? Again, obviously, like the big thing is the Porzingis deal. So, any grade that you give them is pretty much that, right? Like obviously they also picked up Jordan Walsh, in the draft, but he may not play a whole lot just because he's a rookie. He might play some games in the regular season if either guys are out or, whatever. But, obviously the key thing here is Kristaps Porzingis.
Yeah, and for me, I've been kind of teetering back and forth between a B and an A, but I think I'm going to go A here. I think this move is phenomenal. I think it's a win now move. That's what you kind of want to see from a team that's in championship contention, and I think a culmination of all of their moves, I think, was great. They did get rid of Marcus Smart, which I think does hurt them, which is why I was thinking B, but at the same time, they got rid of Grant Williams. They brought in some more wings that are a little bit taller, obviously, bring in Porzingis as well. And then it seems like they're trying to form a new and revamped identity. And I really like that. I think they're trying to, they know that they're really good on defense at certain positions. And I think now they're trying to hone in on that offensive consistency. And I really like that.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I'd give him a B, B plus, because like I said, I don't dislike or hate the Porzingis move. I'm not, like I said, I'm not quite as high on it. But again, all the points that you hit on, I think, is kind of what I was thinking as well, just in terms of the Celtics. Like, they have been consistently a pretty good defensive team. Although last year they did slip on the defensive end,
Yes.
for one reason or another. And I think one of those reasons was because Marcus Smart wasn't as good last year as he was, the champion or not championship, the
The
year that they
finals.
went
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
So, if he's a guy, that may get a little bit worse, then it makes a lot of sense, right? Just because, again, like there was no way they weren't going to do anything. Like I said, I felt like it was going to be either Marcus Smart, or Robert Williams, or maybe even Horford, but I didn't think he'd get a lot back. So I
Right.
was thinking like either Williams because of his injury issues or Marcus Smart was the most likely scenario. Brogdon
Right.
wasn't even in my head in terms of like were they going to trade Brogdon just because they had just acquired him and he played pretty well for them last year. Obviously he got hurt in the playoffs, so he's an injury risk as well. Um, but overall, like I said, I think it makes sense. Like we'll see how it fits. But like I said, you're getting that star power. But you are making a gamble because again, you're losing the guy who was the leader in the locker room. But at the same time, The rest of the core is still there, right? Derek White, he's coming in now, like I said, to take over Marcus Smart's spot, and I think he can do that. I think he's up for the challenge, of replacing what Marcus Smart brought. And then after that, right, then it's up to also Tatum and Brown, right? What improvements do they make, to their games? Because they're still very young. They're still at an age where they can still get better and keep adding on to their
Yeah,
game, right? Because at times, sometimes they can be kind of shaky, like you said, and that's kind of one of the things about them is like when they're, at their best, you know, a lot of people might, would say they're the best duo in the NBA, right?
sure.
But there's also times where like, when it doesn't work, it looks really rough.
Yeah,
Um,
like so
so
much isolation. One of them can't go left. It's like, ugh,
right.
it's really bro. Ugh,
Yeah, so
I don't know.
that's the main thing. Can they continue to make improvements? I think in their playmaking and passing, because I think that's like I said, I think that's the main weakness of the team. Kind of like the Suns, where you have guys that are good passers for their positions, but you still don't necessarily have like that one guy like late in games that can kind of settle down the offense, and kind
True
of get everyone
playmaker.
where they need to be. And like I said, Tatum can pass the ball very well, but he's not necessarily a quote unquote point guard. I know he does run a lot of the offense in terms of having the ball in his hands. Obviously, like you mentioned, Tatum, he's a very much a one-on-one guy, and Brown is a one-on-one guy.
Yeah,
So I mean, we'll see. But like I said, I still think they can be really good. I'm just really curious to see how the Porzingis fit works. Because like I said, in my mind, I'm envisioning, like I said, on defense, playing some drop coverage with him. And then on offense, either like, pick and pops, right? Some post ups. And obviously, of course, the threes. Because Boston, that was the other thing was like, the last couple of years, that's been like all not their entire offense, but a huge part of their offense was the 3-point shot.
right.
Um, and we know when they, shot 40% or better from three, they were a very good team, right? In terms of their winning record, was like 60%. They win like more than 60% of their games, when they shot like 40% or better from three. And then when they shot under 40% from three, they were below 500 basically. So when they
Right.
didn't shoot well, like really well, because 40% as a team is really good. So if they didn't shoot really well from three, they usually lost.
Yeah,
So,
that was the
you know,
trend.
yeah, and Porzingis can do other things other than shoot threes. So, like I said, that's I think kind of the part where like, okay, the 3-point shot isn't working. So maybe you can kind of get us a bucket, in some ways, to help us out. So that's where I think, like I said, he can help mainly on the offensive end. So, because again, he is a really good offensive player. It's just
Yeah,
about again, how do teams scheme for him in the playoffs? Just because again, he's been a little bit up and down in the postseason, but now he's playing behind, other guys where now he's like a third option basically, right? You know
right.
what I mean? Because like in Dallas, he was kind of put into a co-star role where I don't necessarily think he's really good enough to be a co-star, like the second best guy on a team. But if he's like your third or fourth best player, then I think that's kind of where, he is probably properly slotted. You know what I mean? So
Exactly.
I think
I think
this
the
is a
fit
good
is great.
right. So I think this is a good slot for him in terms of like the role. I'm just curious to see what the fit looks like.
You're right.
So now, we're going into the last team of our Atlantic Division.
Joy.
And this was another team that kind of had a very, tumultuous season, but unlike the Celtics, had a very tumultuous offseason. And that's the Philadelphia 76ers. So, obviously with the Sixers, they are the team, that was once again, they were eliminated in the playoffs early, right? Second round by the Boston Celtics in 7 games. It was tough because, we did pick the Celtics to win the series, but there was a point when it really looked like Philadelphia, had a chance to win. I think we still thought the Celtics were going to win, but we all remember the game 6, with the Sixers where they had the lead in the fourth quarter and just completely melted down, just couldn't do anything right. And then, they had a game 7, which was, truly awful, where, it was close for about a half. And then in the second half, they basically quit. Um, so obviously, led by their two stars, right, with, Embiid, who won the MVP last year, along with James Harden, right, who seems like he's kind of been the guy that hasn't necessarily, you know, been all that great, in terms of like, what's been going on as of late. So, in terms of their offseason, obviously it really started, with, reportedly, Harden, opting into that player option when most people thought he was going to opt out and re-sign long term with Philly, or at the very least, maybe like, 3 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he ended up not doing that. He ended up opting in, and then right after that it was reported that he actually was doing that because he wanted to be traded. So, it was kind of funny because, with the Sixers last year, I think pretty much from Christmas onwards, right? There were lots of rumors, that were out there that were suggesting that he was thinking about maybe going back to Houston. It didn't make any sense to
Oh,
us at the time.
yeah.
And it still didn't make any sense, like as we got closer and closer to the end of the season. And that didn't happen, So I think part of that in terms of him opting in was I feel like, the money that he thought was going to be there wasn't there
Right.
from many of these teams, and apparently including from Philly, it wasn't necessarily there, right? His side is that he believes that Daryl Morey, was not very honest with him in terms of, what he thought was going to happen because we know last offseason he took a discount from Philly in order to allow Philly to put together, a better roster, sign some more guys that they wouldn't have gotten. Had he taken like a regular max deal, right? They got like PJ Tucker, Daniel House. They traded for D'Anthony Melton, right? We know all of this, right? Because they ended up,
Yes.
getting their picks taken away. So we know all of that, has some level of legitimacy to it. Um, but at the same time, right, like now he wants nothing to do with him. So, their offseason has kind of been kind of all over the place, in terms of like, they signed Patrick Beverly, as a backup point guard. Obviously, he played for the Lakers last year, so another former Laker that goes to Philly, and along with multiple other guys that we'll get into.
Mhm.
Again, he was fine for the Bulls, right? The Bulls had their little playoff or play-in run, where they got to the 10th seed and they lost, to the Heat after they won the first play-in game. Um, and then after that, right, they brought back Danny Green, right, who had been moved, elsewhere, right? He was in Cleveland, I think last year by the playoffs. I think he was traded from Philly to Memphis, and then Memphis traded him to Cleveland or bought him out, I think, or whatever, and then he
Yeah.
went to but now he came back on a minimum, right? He did tear his ACL, what, like, in the postseason a couple years ago,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then he came back, but he's an older player now. So how much is he going to play? Don't necessarily know. They signed Montrezl Harrell, but unfortunately he had, a horrible injury, I think in a workout where he tore like his ACL and his meniscus. So he's probably not going to play at all this year.
Nope.
So that's kind of a rough signing. They signed Mo Bamba from the Lakers, right? The Lakers let him go, and he went to Philly as a backup big man. They re-signed Paul Reed, who was a restricted free agent, right? He was a guy, who down the stretch at different points, would kind of come in. He slotted in for Embiid, when he was out. Even in the playoff games that he missed or didn't play in, right? He played and he played pretty well. So I like that. It was a contract that the Jazz gave him, but they matched it. Um, they drafted or brought in Philippe Petrusev, right? Again, another overseas guy, right? Probably not going to play a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but outside of that, then they also recently, just a week ago or just, a handful of days ago, signed Kelly Oubre Jr., right? Who was, kind of just sitting in the free agency market, not really being signed. A lot of rumors that were kind of suggesting that, like, if a Lillard trade were to go down, he would go to Miami, or just, but he, didn't want to wait for so long. So he ended up going to the Sixers. Um, again on a minimum contract, with an opportunity, with a chance, to kind of show that he can make an impact because he had been a guy who's been on a number of teams, hadn't really been able to stick around. It seems like he's got a reputation as a good stats on a bad team type of guy, but like I said, this is a chance. This is the best team that I think he's been on, in terms of talent. To kind of show like that hey, I can be a winning player. And then
Right.
kind of cash out on that, and that's fine to take a swing on these type of guys. You know what I mean? So, um, I'm not mad at their offseason
Hmm.
necessarily. Obviously the big question is the Harden, factor because again, that plays a lot into what's going to happen, right? Is he going to show up to training camp? A lot of people think he isn't going to show up to training camp. And even if he does, how into it is he going to be, right? I highly doubt that he's, backed off his trade request. I think he still wants to be traded,
Yeah.
and still hopes that he will be traded at some point.
Yes.
We'll see. But, then with Philly, you also have to factor in, you got a lot of things that you have to kind of walk carefully on because, again, if you mess this up and you get like a horrible return for Harden, right, then obviously that's not going to necessarily sit well with Joel Embiid. Um, and then what if he requests a trade all of a sudden, or if his, mind is kind of not into it? I think the goal, from what I understand for Philly, is they believe that they can be kind of like a free agency team or a free agency destination like a year from now. But I just don't think that that's going to happen. I mean,
Nope.
you got to re-sign Tyrese Maxey, and then you pretty much would have to like let go of like most of their other free agents like Tobias Harris, James Harden, and like Philly just historically does not get free agents,
Right.
So it's I understand it, but at the same time, that's a dangerous game because I just again I haven't looked at the free agency class yet, so it could be really good, but I would need to check. But at the
Even if
same
it is
time,
good, who's gonna want to actually go there unless there's
right?
some
Yeah,
crazy money involved?
yeah. Because again, just historically, they don't get free agents. Just because again, like you look at historically a lot, the places where a lot of players tend to go, through free agency. Philly is not one of those destinations, right? And like they've had several years where they had money to sign somebody, and they just didn't do it, or they lost guys, right? Like they had the year where they had Jimmy Butler, right, and he ended up leaving, right? So I mean, so it's just like it's just kind of rough. Like I said, I'm not mad at their offseason, but the Harden thing does definitely kind of put like a kind of like a sting into it, just because you don't know what's going to happen. Because if the Harden thing wasn't really a factor, their offseason wouldn't necessarily be too terrible. I mean,
You
there
think
wasn't a
so?
whole lot. I mean, I'm not saying it was good or great. I'm just saying like it wouldn't necessarily be the worst because it's like given the cap thing, they couldn't really sign anybody other than minimum contracts.
Sure.
But because of the Harden factor, like you can't really say a whole lot of positive things. Like other than the Ubre thing, it's just like like I don't really love too many of these signings.
I don't like anything.
Yeah, like with Beverly, like, he's an older guy, so how much is he really going to give you at this point? He's not going to play as big a role as he did, say, for like the Lakers or the Bulls where he was starting. Um, but still, what is he going to do, at this point, in terms of like a huge impact, right? Danny Green, what is he going to bring to the table? Montrezl Harrell isn't playing. Mo Bamba, he's still a question mark. Like I said, even Kelly Oubre, right, who's a talent guy, who's a talented guy, he's a question mark as well. So, those things combined with the Harden factor, like, I don't know, man. Like, it's rough. Like I said, I like the Oubre thing, but outside of that, like, I don't know. And maybe it's just because like some of these guys, like because they played for my team last year and didn't necessarily do a whole lot. Like maybe I'm just like not as high on say Patrick Beverly or Mo Bamba. Maybe it's just me, but
No, I'm not high on it either.
yeah, like I said, other than the Ubre one, which I do like only because it's a minimum contract, like
Right.
I don't know. I don't
That's the
really
only
love a lot
positive.
of what they did this offseason. I know it's kind of sounded like I was pretty positive about it, but like I said, I just fail to see a lot of positives, mainly because of the Harden thing, And again, it's just like what can you really do? Like I said, it's all minimum contracts pretty much, and like I said, other than the Ubre one, I don't know. I mean, maybe you feel differently, but it doesn't sound like you do.
I mean, I feel worse than you, I think. For me, it's like
Okay,
last year, I know we talked about it a lot. Mid-season, we were like, this is a pretty bare bones roster, like outside of their starting five, maybe even their
right?
six man, like you're just like, there's not a lot going on there. And there's no way they can get out of like the playoffs like that and in a positive way. And of course, what did they do? They exited. So it's like, for me, I didn't think the roster could get any more bare bones, but it actually did. I don't really like a lot of stuff that's going on here. And like
Yeah,
even like
they lost
small
Book in
guys,
the end.
like yeah, Niang, like I was just about to say that. Like even small guys that actually provided somewhat of a role, even though I wasn't a big fan of them, like Niang is
Right.
gone. And it's like, I don't know. And then the whole McDaniel situation, that's gone as well. And then you replace that
Right.
with Danny Green. Trez,
Yeah,
he got hurt, like you said. Bamba, I don't think is gonna do anything, much of
they signed
anything.
like four centers.
Yeah, and it's like I don't necessarily understand the thought process. So as you can tell, I'm very low on this. Um, not good, not good at all. Like I said, I didn't think you could get any more bare bones than this. I mean, like I understand Joel Embiid and James Harden can carry you to the playoffs, but they can't carry you to a championship, even if the East is this weak.
'Yeah, so do you feel like that they got worse?
100%. This is a regression. And I know that's
Okay,
crazy to say, but it's a regression.
yeah, like I said, I think the main thing is again that a lot of the guys that they sign, well, not a lot of them, but a lot of the guys that they sign, well, yeah, I guess that is in a way a lot of them. Yeah, a lot of them are just question marks because
All
again,
of
like
them.
Patrick, Beverley, again, I know he's a guy, that is a name, but again, what is he going to bring to the table? I guess like I said, in a smaller role, he might, be better, I suppose, as opposed to being a starter. Danny Green, like I said, I don't expect a whole lot from him at this point in his career. I like Danny Green, but again, like, this version of Danny Green, I don't think is going to do a whole lot. And then, like you said, Trez isn't going to play. Bamba didn't really do much for the Lakers. He was hurt in fairness, but,
Even
still
then.
like, Yeah, even then, like I mean, again, the fact that the Lakers like just got rid of him and didn't even bother bringing him back, and I mean,
Should
like
tell
I
you
guess
something.
they got Christian Wood, but like that kind of does tell you something, you know, like the fact that
Yeah.
they had two guys, him and Beasley, and they left and just got minimum contracts elsewhere. It wasn't like they left and got bigger contracts somewhere else. They got less money, way less money.
Yeah. Not high on
'Cause I
this
think
at all.
yeah, like Bamba, I think was at 10 million, and I think Beasley was like maybe 16ish or something like that.
Right.
So, I mean, at this point, I don't know. Like I said, I mean, maybe Embiid just needs to just like call, the front office now. But like, at the same time, like, if they're healthy, they're probably still going to win a lot of games just because it is the Eastern Conference.
And it's
Um,
Embiid and Harden. Like,
Right, and it's a beat and Harden, just because that's good enough to get you, through the regular season. It's just again, what version of Harden am I getting? Am I getting a Harden that's going to be, a distraction that where he's not really going to be into it, and he's going to just, be a problem like we've
or
seen in the
and
past,
force his way out.
and force his way out, right? Are we going to get a Harden that's, I guess I don't know, 60% committed, versus like 10% committed? I don't know. Like just history would suggest no, right? And it,
Right.
but at the same time, again, we'll see with Daryl Morey because he had Ben Simmons, he had to deal with that, and he held them on. He held on until like the very last possible moment. I think it
Sure.
literally was the day of the trade deadline where he ended up trading him, for Harden. So does he do that with Harden? I don't know because at this point now, I feel like, with Morey, he could be in a spot now where his job security might be in trouble now, where it's like, if he makes like another, bad decision or bad move or something, or has just something go wrong, he could be gone.
Yeah.
He came in, and it felt like, he was kind of coming and cleaning up the mess, of the previous front office, but, now like it doesn't, I guess it's quote unquote better, but is it really? Like they haven't
Not
gotten
much
any
has
further.
changed.
Yeah, like, not much has changed, like, I still feel like the best team that they had was the one that had, Simmons, Reddick, Butler, Harrison, and Embiid. That roster, was really good, I think, they just had the unfortunate bad luck of, the Kawhi shot going in, but,
Pretty much.
since then, the other series losses they've had is just like, these are bad, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like they lost to the Hawks, who they shouldn't have lost to, where they had multiple big fourth quarter leads blown, right? I think that was the last series, where they had Simmons. And then of course, last season, I mean, I understand it's the Celtics, but like they should not have like, blown that fourth quarter
They
against
had
Boston.
them.
Like, yeah, like they had them. Like it was just like it's just brutal. But
They
again, you
sold,
almost come to
man.
expect it at this point, with this group of guys. So it's just like, again, like, Embiid has gotten better every year.
Hmm.
But again, it seems like he, runs out of gas come playoff time. We know Harden is always an up and down playoff player. He had two games where he was their best player, but he also had some games where he was their worst player. So I
Pretty
mean,
much.
that can't happen, with a guy who's supposed to be, one of your best players. So,
Exactly.
you have, that uncertainty, like, it's just hard. It's hard to believe in this Philly team, I think,
I don't
personally.
trust it, bro.
Yeah, because it's just like, again, we've seen it too many times over where it's just like there's only a certain amount of times it can keep happening before like you just kind of have to accept what's happening. You know what I mean? So it's like I have very little faith that they're gonna get, to, the conference finals or, the NBA or even the NBA finals. I mean, like they
They're
haven't even
no
been to.
shot. They're a no shot for the finals. I can tell you
Yeah,
that.
'cause that's the main thing. It's just like it just feels like they are, kind of like a solid third or fourth, in terms of the Eastern Conference pecking order, right? Like I think the Celtics and the Bucks, right? Those are even though the Bucks didn't get as far as the Sixers, I think when healthy, I think, I just, I feel like the Bucks you can trust a little bit more than the Sixers. I know like
If I
last
was a
year was kind of
better, I would put my money on the Bucks, not the 76ers.
yeah, and then the Celtics, I think they've had a better history of success in the postseason than Philly. So and again, like we talked about it, like you said, it just they needed to add, I think, a little bit more depth, to kind of shore up some things around the edges. But I think it's hard, and I also just think like with that starting five, because we hadn't talked about them, like Harden, Maxey, Harris, Tucker, and B. That's what I think it's going to be. Maxey is their young guy who we hadn't talked about yet, who's been really good. He
Hmm.
can get better, obviously, and that can kind of elevate them. But the issue is like him and Harden are like, kind of just diametrically opposing players, like in the sense of they don't really play anything alike. Like Maxey loves to play really fast. Harden kind of, prefers to play a lot slower. Um, which you would think, would kind of like mesh together well. But at the same time, also like, neither guard is a really good defender. So it's like, ideally, I do kind of wonder, like, if it wasn't Harden and you got some other guard back, maybe like a bigger guard, and then just be like, all right, Max, you're going to be like our faux point guard, kind of like,
Yes.
you know what I mean? Like, what
Yes.
would that look like? Like, because
I
then you
would
could play a
enjoy
little
that
bit.
more.
Yeah, but like at the same time, like with Embiid, you're not going to play fast because he doesn't play fast. He
Right.
doesn't really run up and down the floor, even though he moves well for a guy his size. His style of play isn't really like running up and down the floor, right? It's
Right.
like a lot of one-on-one, isolation,
Bruiser.
play or face up scoring or what. We've seen it at this point.
Yeah, we know his
So
game.
right, and again, like I said, with the forwards, Harris and Tucker, I think with Harris, I think when he's like your fourth, best or, something like that. I think that's fine. And I guess in a way he kind of is like, I guess their fourth best player if you still feel like, if you think Maxi is better, which, I think at this point he would be better.
Yes.
So, but at the same time, who is he the fourth best guy behind, right? Because like I said, before when he was with, the other squad, right, it was Embiid, Butler, Simmons, Reddick, Harris, right? That's a different, fourth tier guy versus like being the fourth best guy on this team where it's, an older Harden, Embiid who is better now than he was then, but still, right? And then Maxey who's a young guy, so that's the thing where it's like I do kind of like Tobias Harris, but I feel like his role in Philly is just really strange because again, like, offensively, you know, it feels like he's like a semi like three
Yes.
four kind of, but then it's like, defensively he can't really guard threes like that. So
Right.
it's just a weird fit. Tucker I think fits fine, but he's also, really old.
Yeah, I'm not a
You know,
fan.
right. So like, at this point he's 38, so like, at a certain point, he's gonna probably start taking a dip at least somewhat. I mean,
I think
he's
he
still
already
he's
has.
yeah, like he kind of already has. Like I'm not saying he's bad, but like,
Right.
it's just like at a certain point, that can't be, your two primary options in terms of your forwards, right? Like that's just, I just don't think that's necessarily a good mix. I think so you kind of have to choose between I don't know if choosing between one or the other is necessarily what you should do. But like I said, I still believe that like, at this point, if you can find some type of Harris deal where you can just split up his contract, into multiple pieces, kind of like what the Lakers did with Westbrook, where like they split up his contract, got multiple guys back, to kind of like fill in the holes, fill in the gaps.
Yes.
That would be okay. But his contract is so big, like I don't know. And again, no contract is tradable as we've learned, at this point. But I feel like that's kind of the missing thing here. But with the team as currently constructed, I don't really see any reason why they would be any better than they were last year. Like, you know
Yeah,
what I
this
mean? Like,
is a
because I don't,
sin,
like
man.
I said, yeah, because I don't necessarily know if they completely got worse, but they definitely didn't get better. So they're either, in my opinion, about the same or maybe slightly worse. It just depends on how good the signings are. Like if Oubre pops and he plays really well, then that obviously adds some really good stuff on the wings, right?
Sure.
But is Kelly Oubre gonna be the guy that lifts Philly over the top? Like if
Heck
you're
no.
banking on that, then like I don't know. I don't think that's a good
That's
idea.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm not high on this team at all.
So I guess, in terms of a grade, I
Mhm.
guess what grade would you give, Philadelphia?
This is
Because
gonna
again,
hurt some people's feelings.
like,
But yeah, my grade is 100% an F.
ooh,
Yeah, I know. I think, like you said, you don't necessarily think they got worse, but I think they regressed to the point of I'm not going to say no return, but to the point of self-destruction. This is really bad. And it really stems from Harden. I think, they've
right, that's
put
what I was saying.
everything up in the air. Harden's future is up in the air with the team, which also correlates to Embiid's future as well. So now there's just this cloud of uncertainty. You didn't get anybody that's noteworthy that's going to really help you in the playoffs. Maybe in the regular season, okay, but nobody to help you get that playoff push that this team desperately needs. And like I said earlier, the roster was already bare bones the last season, and now it's even more bare bones, which I didn't think was possible. So F 100%. I mean, there's a couple of things that I like, but everything else that I don't like just completely overshadows everything. But they have completely ruined, I think, what little chemistry they kind of had with James Harden and Joel Embiid, especially with the front office. I think everything's kind of weird.
Right, yeah, like I said, I feel like I don't know. I'm gonna be a little bit more generous and say like C minus,
Hmm.
only because again, like I do like the Oubre thing, but at the same time, like again, I don't really love it. Like I said, I think if he pops, he could be really good for them. But most of the other stuff I don't really love a whole lot. Like, again, even if Trez was healthy, like, I don't think at this point it seems like he really, is going to help a team a whole lot. And, I don't really feel like he did a whole lot with Philly before.
No,
Um, Paul Reed I do like, so there's no issues bringing him back and re-signing him. Bamba we'll see. He is a young guy, but so far he hasn't really done a whole lot.
no,
Um, Danny Green, right? Probably not going to do a whole lot for them.
no.
So at this point, you're almost kind of banking on, Tyrese Maxey taking another leap forward. They didn't sign him to an extension. Like I said, I think part of that is to keep the flexibility open, potentially for next off season. But, again, like, I don't know. Cause like if you're Embiid, like in the front office is almost kind of saying like, yeah, if you just wait another year, we'll get somebody for you. And it's like, I don't know. Like that just I don't know how I would feel about that if I were Embiid, but
Yeah.
and again, like I think ideally he wants to win in Philadelphia, but at a certain point, like again, like fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, basically. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
if the theme of Boston last year, was kind of like one step forward, two steps back. But, for like Philly this offseason, I feel like the theme might as well be like 500 steps back,
Yeah.
5,000 miles backwards,
Yeah.
basically like,
It's regression,
like
bro.
yeah, it's brutal. Again, because like it's not, like I said, it's not the worst. I mean, this is the first F you've given, so I guess that pretty much suggests that you think this is the worst off season of any of the teams.
Yes,
Like,
100%. Just due to the off-season drama mainly,
right?
especially because you
Yeah,
you messed it up. They mucked everything
yeah,
up.
yeah. Because that was
Embiid
kind of
probably doesn't want to be there. Harden probably doesn't want to be there.
right. Because that was kind of my point where I'm like, if the Harden thing hadn't happened, I wouldn't feel quite as low on what they did, even though I don't love it. But with the Harden thing, I just don't see how that's gonna go well. Because again, historically, when he is not very happy, right, it doesn't get resolved until he's gone. So it's just like
Exactly.
I have a really hard time believing that he's gonna come in, he's gonna play nice, and then all of a sudden Philly's gonna win a bunch of games, and then they're gonna be somewhere around where they were last year. Like I just have a really hard time believing that. I know that like all the trade talks for Harden have died down basically, whereas the Lillard stuff, seems like it just keeps going on and on and on. But I don't know, like just would it? I guess to end, to kind of put a wrap on the Philly talk. Do
Mhm.
you think that Harden will end up getting dealt, or do you think he'll just kind of like just play it out in Philly and maybe just kind of bounce in the off season or something
I
like
think
that?
he's probably going to be dealt because, like, my thing is all this drama started off of a backdoor handshake deal, which is like shady as heck. I don't like that. And that suggests to me that the relationship has completely soured. And we already know this guy does not really play Mr. Nice Guy. He chooses the red answers in my career. He's the guy that chooses the wrong ones, the cocky answers. So he's going to be gone. We've seen it what, 3 times now?
Yeah, I
This will
mean
be the
Houston,
third.
yeah, Houston, Brooklyn, and now Philly.
Right,
So
because and it's like my thing is with this situation, I think it's 50-50 blame. I'm not blaming Harden 100%. I'm not blaming Philly and Daryl Morey 100%, but I think it's 50-50 because of that deal. Like, it's just weird and the whole investigation too. It's just not a good look, bad light, and then now you've messed up the chemistry and you've put that uncertainty into Joel Embiid's head now for sure. I think
yeah,
everybody knows that he's concerned for his future as well because if he loses a co-star, they don't get anything in return. Okay, well now we suck even more.
right. Because the Houston one, at that point, Houston I think had run its course, as a legitimate contender. So I mean, it made sense that he wanted to go, somewhere else. He went to Brooklyn. It seemed like they were on, a path to potentially winning a title. Then they get hurt, right? And then the next season, everything falls apart with the Kyrie stuff. And again, I understand, wanting out of that situation because that was pretty, rough.
Yes.
Because you just didn't know what you were gonna get. And then you go to Philly, and then Philly does put together a decent team last year. A team that had a chance to win. He didn't deliver. And now like this is it's a rough situation. Like you said, that's where like everybody kind of shares the blame. Because like at least with the Houston one, like I said, I understood it had run its course. There was
Yeah.
no way at that point Houston was going to win
They
a title.
tried with Westbrook, they tried with Chris Paul, and then they brought in John Wall, and it was Cruz from there. It was over.
Yeah. Yeah, and then with Brooklyn, I understand that to an extent just because of the Kyrie blow up, right? Where it's just like at that point, you had no idea what to expect. You didn't even know whether or not he was going to play.
Right.
But, then with this one, like I said, this is the one where it's like, yeah, like you got to take some culpability as well because you didn't play well. You didn't come through, even though, yeah, if if Philly promised to give you, a contract if you took less money and they didn't give it to you, yeah, that's definitely on Philly as well. And that's also another thing where it's like, if that's how, Daryl Morey conducts his business, right? Then that's another reason why it would be pretty hard, for them to get another free agent if he's still there. Because like,
Exactly.
because again, I think he's been a decent GM, but I also think at the same time it does feel like, because he's kind of like, the I guess poster child sort of the analytics movement. Some of the more negative aspects, that people view, analytics from, in terms of the idea of like, hey, like these guys, they didn't necessarily grow up in sports. They grew up, more in the other environment, and they're not necessarily thinking about the human element. They're more so thinking of like, the mathematical elements, right? Where like the players are kind of looked more as a sort of like just assets as opposed to,
Robots.
like, yeah, as opposed to like actual people. And, I'm sure some players may not necessarily like that. So, we'll see. But yeah, like I said, I think a lot if Philly is going to have any semblance of legitimate success this season, a lot of it hinges on Harden because he's the guy ultimately, where it seems like he wants out. Like you said, if he plays Mr. Nice Guy, right, then, we'll see. But there's no history of that, necessarily. So,
And people
like I
don't
said,
change
right.
normally.
So, yeah. And like, especially at this point in his career, like, I mean, like, I don't know. So, like I said, I feel like at some point something's gonna happen because like something's got to give, right? Because like either he ends up showing up and he ends up playing and it's at least relatively okay early on, or he goes scorched earth, right? And then they work to end this thing really quickly.
Hmm.
And again, we'll keep everybody posted, but I don't know. I
It's
think if
up in
you're
the air, man.
Philadelphia, yeah, you gotta feel pretty bad if you're like a Sixers fan right now, because again, you had a team, that was decent. Like I'm not saying that it was a great team, but they had a chance to beat
It
Boston,
was a
and
building block. They could have
right,
built on this, but they tore it down.
right, exactly. And again, the Kawhi buzzer beater, that was the brutal one, especially because that team was good enough, I think, to win it all. And to
For
lose
sure.
on a shot like that, and from that point, it just feels like everything just went downhill from there. Where it's like Ben Simmons eventually got hurt, and then he wasn't the same, and then just fell out of favor in Philly. Right, then you bring in Harden, who and it seemed like it was going okay, and then now it's not okay, and now it's possible, everything could be blown up. So it's just been, the process, I think at this point, has been pretty brutal. Like, I mean, yeah, there are teams that have had it worse, I suppose.
Hmm.
But like at the same time, like, it's just again, like just a few years ago, they had one of the best starting fives in the league. And like, now it's just like now we're talking about like, a lot of just filler pieces where there's just not a whole lot there. Like it's just rough. You know what I mean? So it's just
I agree 100%. That's why I've been so harsh on them because this is
right.
unacceptable.
Yeah, so they got a lot of questions, I think, to deal with. And, it's kind of funny, because we hadn't mentioned it yet, but, like training camp and media day is coming up relatively soon. And, I do wonder, does Harden show up to media day? Do they ask him questions? And the new coach, Nick Nurse, who we hadn't mentioned yet, right?
Yeah.
He's Doc Rivers, I think he'll do a better job there. But at the same time, is that going to be the difference? Like, I don't think so. I'm curious, what they'll ask him, about the Harden situation because I'm sure, he's aware of what's going on since he's the coach. So, I mean, like, so I
Yeah.
wonder if they ask him anything or if he kind of, keeps quiet about it, or maybe some of the other players, right? What does Maxey think about it? So, um, there's a big cloud I think over this team. Like I said, I think they can still be good. Just if the guys actually play, and Harden, actually like tries. But, if he's still there and he's not, into it, then it's gonna be kind of rough because you can't have one of the best players on your team, kind of like basically playing for the other team. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Where it's like, he's got one foot in and out of the door, where it's like, he wants out. You
Yeah.
know,
He
like
doesn't give a
yeah,
crap.
right, exactly. Because that's yeah. Once it gets to the point where you don't care, that's where it's rough. Because we've seen situations where like guys are in the last year of their deals. We know they're gonna leave, but they're still trying, right? Like when Durant was in Golden State and he was in the last year of his deal, and most people thought he was gone, right? Like he still tried. You know what I mean? Like he got hurt, but like he was still playing. He still acted like he cared. I know they had the
Right.
blow up, with him and Draymond,
He
right? But
still wanted to
he didn't
win.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You didn't question his effort, but like, with Harden, I don't know, like there's a lot of questions about that. So,
Even
I mean, and
Braun, like when he was in Miami,
Hmm.
And then the last year, like you could tell he
Right.
was trying,
Yeah.
but like at the end of the day, we all knew he was going somewhere else. We
Right.
just didn't know
Yeah.
where.
Exactly. Yeah, or even the last year in Cleveland, like where
Exactly.
it's like, yeah, like,
You didn't
like
question his effort because clearly the
right.
guy wanted to win, or else he wouldn't have blown up in J.R. Smith's face like that.
Yeah, but it just I don't know, and even with his age, that's why when they initially reported the idea of like, he's gonna sign like a a full 4-year deal or whatever, I'm like, really? Because he's 34, he'd be like 38, 39 or whatever at the end of that deal, and like, what is he gonna look like at that point? Because he's
Exactly.
still good. Because I think he had a stretch this year where he played really well, but now he gets hurt a lot more, and now he's older, right?
And
He's
I'll give
still
it to
not
him. Like
quite as good.
he stepped up on that playmaking aspect of his game. Like I
Right.
like Harden's game a lot because I remember, back when he was on Houston, he was more of like score, 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 score. And I guess that was more like the Mike D'Antoni stuff. But
Mhm.
I am glad that he did, start averaging some more assists. It's pretty cool to see. But
Right.
at the
Yeah,
end
I
of the
think he led
day,
assists. Yeah, I think he led the league in assists last year, with
yeah,
just under 11 a game. I mean, he's definitely transitioned into, like another role. But again, just the question is, at a certain point, his game has become a lot more perimeter oriented now where he's taking, a lot of threes and he shot well from three last year,
hmm
38.5%. But again, like, at his peak, right, he was a guy where he could, really do some damage around the rim as well. Like he was never like a super athletic guy, but I remember like, he would have, those random possessions where he would, kind of just run to the rim and throw it down and, do that nosebleed thing.
sure.
So,
Even Euros, like the
right.
Euros, and I don't know. It's just rough.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Right. The free throw attempts, were down, right? I think, he had 6 a game last year, right? And we
hmm
know, before that he was, like around, he used to be in double digits, I think, in
Yes.
Houston, but the last few years he, he'd been around 8, 9 or so, but last year he was at 6. So,
hmm
like the free throw attempts going down also kind of suggests that, there's a little bit of a decline there, right? Because, clearly he's not quite as, comfortable just driving to the basket, and taking contact, which again, he's older.
Yeah,
So
it's
that's the other
acceptable.
thing, right, as well. Is like how many, if, like I can understand Philly not wanting to give him a long-term deal, but again, you promised to give him that deal potentially.
Right.
So it's like you kind of have to lay in your bed and sleep in it. But and again, if they promised him that and they ended up not giving it to him, like I'm not really surprised, because
Exactly.
like even if it wasn't Harden, if it was another player, like I'm sure there'd be like a lot of just like issues going on. I don't
Like,
know
did
if
they
it
think
would
this
get
was gonna end
to
well?
this point. Yeah, like that's the other thing. Like again, we know the deal with this guy. So like at a certain point, like you kind of have to know who you're getting into business with and when it doesn't go right, it's like, well, you saw this before. So like, you kind of had a feeling that this was coming.
Right.
So that's the rough part there here, but again, I still like some of the guys on this team. It's just again like do we think that they're going to get to the finals? Like I don't think so. Like they
Not at
have a
all.
chance. Like, they have a chance just because it's the Eastern Conference, but, like, at the same time,
No,
like
they're not beating any of the team. No, no, they're not beating the Bucks. They're not beating the Celtics. Simple as that. And honestly, I think they might even struggle with Cleveland. That's my hot take.
yeah. Yeah, because Cleveland is a team, we you can go back to it, we thought they got better, but, yeah, so let us know in the comments, what you guys think, of our takes on, Philly and Boston. Because again, this was kind of like one of the few times where I think we did have, like, some different outlooks on some of these teams.
Sure.
Because I mean, like, we were kind of on the same page with Boston,
hmm
but I don't. Yeah, like I'm not as high on the Porzingis deal. You're much
Sure.
higher on it than me, but still, like we both, we're in a similar sphere, but it's a
Yeah.
little bit different. And
Yes.
even with the Philly one, like there's a little bit of difference here, even though we both are like, I
Yeah.
don't know
I'm
about
just
that.
like, screw this, bro.
Yeah, you're like completely out.
Yeah, I could care less at this point.
Yeah. So now we're going into the news and rumors, to wrap things up. So, again, more Lillard trade talk. So,
Woohoo! It
this
never
time,
ends.
yeah, so it's like the never-ending story. So this time we got some more stuff about teams that could potentially help facilitate a Lillard trade. So we got, for example, teams that Tyler Hero was linked to, right? Teams like the Jazz, the Pacers, teams like that, the Nets as well. So, multiple teams. Also, they had mentioned, the big part of it was, the idea of the Suns also being a potential facilitator. Say, for example, with DeAndre Ayton, where they sent him to Portland. and then they, swap him with like Yusuf Nurkic, right? So that's kind of weird. I don't necessarily know about that one. I think the idea would sort of just be like I think Nurkic's salary is a lot less than 8.
Hmm.
So I think the idea is like you kind of downgrade from the center spot, but you could pick up another piece or two. Like I know there was a version of this. I don't think it would happen, but like another version of it where like you could get like TJ McConnell and Caleb Martin to Phoenix along with Nurkic. So it's like
Okay.
Nurkic isn't as good as Aiton in my opinion because of the leg injury stuff. But if
Sure.
you got him plus some other role players, that could be interesting. But I don't know. That just seems kind of weird because like we talked about it before with the Suns in terms of the idea of like they probably needed to move on from at least one of Chris Paul or Aiton. They already got rid of Chris Paul. Initially dumped him to the nether regions. In
Yeah.
DC, I guess. But
Pretty
now,
much.
yeah, but now he's in Golden State. Funny enough, now with a chance to compete against them. But regardless, now it seems like they may get rid of Aiton. Actually, like that for Portland a lot. I don't like it as much for Phoenix, but if Portland actually were able to get like DeAndre Ayton out of that and not necessarily Tyler Hero, that would be actually amazing.
That would be phenomenal because I feel like, it would be nice to even get like a younger center in DeAndre Ayton to,
Right.
couple with your young, strong backcourt. I think that's like
Right.
a great foundational building block. But are they really going to bite for that? Is Phoenix really going to go for that? I do
I don't
understand that,
know.
the relationship between Phoenix and DeAndre Ayton has been shaky. We saw the
Right.
clips. We know that they get on him a lot, and rightfully so. But at the same time, are they really going to go for that? Are they willing to move on from what? I think he was their former number one overall pick.
He was the number one pick.
So are they willing to do that for Nurkic?
Yeah.
It
I mean,
sounds good in
it's from
theory and on paper, but when
it's
push
from
comes to
Jake
shove,
Fisher.
are they really going to do that? I like
Yeah,
it
it's
though.
from Jake Fisher mainly just again in the idea of helping to facilitate a Lillard trade because there have been, reports that Portland has been talking around, to other teams, about this. And so if they want to get a Lillard trade done, they would want, multiple teams, to kind of help, with some packages. Because again, like I said, if let's say if Lillard were going to Miami, we've talked about it before. We know Portland doesn't want Tyler Hero, which is understandable. It's not that he's a bad player. He just doesn't really fit with what they have there, and he
Right.
makes a decent amount of money. He's probably better suited for some other team, like a Utah, or a Brooklyn or somebody like that, that
Right.
might have some use for him, at that position.
Right.
Whereas with Portland, they're pretty set at the guard spot. So they don't really need to add him. But, just like I said, the Aiton thing is just weird because again, like, like I still think he can still be decent. Like, and, I don't think he's bad. Obviously he didn't necessarily impress last year. We'll see what Frank Vogel can get out of him if he stays. But, I also thought, that like I didn't think he was safe, in the perspective of like, if they believe that there's an upgrade, then they would do it, because again, like it's all about like, do they think that like, say Nurkic plus extra guys is better than just 8? Because
Right.
it's like it is a downgrade in my opinion from the center spot, but you do get a little bit more depth that isn't necessarily minimum contracts.
Mm-hmm. Like I can't
So
be too mad at it, but I do understand it.
yeah. Like I said, and for me, it's like I'm just skeptical about the Nurkic thing because it's like at this point, he gets hurt a lot. I don't think he's as impactful or as good as he was before the leg injury or foot injury, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which that was a brutal injury. So props to him for being able to come back, and play through that. But still, I don't think he's the same player at this point. But he is cheaper, than Aiton. And he does do some things, right? Like he's a good rebounder. He's a physical guy, right? So I think he'll, bring some more physicality and toughness
Mm-hmm.
at the center spot than Aiton does. But I also think Aiton is just the better talent.
I agree.
In my opinion, I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but I feel like Aiton at
I
this point
agree.
is a better player. So it's a gamble though for sure. But Phoenix's offseason has been a lot of gambles. So it would definitely be on brand. In terms of like if they did something like that for sure.
Yes.
Because I didn't see a Beal trade coming.
Nope.
From Phoenix's perspective at all, and like I don't know, like, it would be pretty on brand, I think.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, but I do like it a lot for Portland. That's who I would like it the most for. If, like I said, if they can bring back somebody who's still pretty good, that's young, that isn't Tyler Hero, I think that's a home run if you can do that if you're Portland. Because
Yes.
again, I don't think you're going to get a great return, but I think that's a pretty good return, especially if you also got picks, from somebody. Like that's pretty good, I think. If you can get at least one good young player and picks. I think that's the
Absolutely.
ideal type of trade because I don't think you're going to get everything you want just because we know where Lillard wants to go, and what he wants to do. So,
Yes.
um, going into the next rumor, according to Mark Stein, Raptors seriously eyeing Dame. So it kind of sounds like that secret team may be Toronto. Toronto has genuine interest in acquiring Lillard from Portland. I mean, this one
Hmm.
is just so strange. Like I
Yeah.
said, I understand, Toronto's, like push, to do something because, they're trying to, be somewhat relevant, right? But I don't know. Like to me, the main question mark I have is what is the deal? Who's going to Portland or whatever? And then it's like, how good are you actually going to be? Like I
It's got to be
understand Toronto
Scotty.
has taken right because like I think Toronto has taken gambles before because they did, Kawhi Leonard, right? They traded DeRozan, all for who had been there forever for Kawhi, right? Now that was an upgrade and it helped them win a title. So you do that trade 10 times out of 10.
Hmm.
But I don't necessarily think that Lillard is Kawhi. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like in terms of like when they're at their best. Um, and again, if you're Toronto, like the pieces that you have now weren't the same pieces that you had in place the year you won the title. It's a
Right.
very it's a different team now. So
Right.
the question for me is like if you're Toronto, what are you giving up? Because like you mentioned Barnes, it could be Barnes. Some people think it might be like Ananobi. Some people think maybe Siakam. I don't know. Like they have some pieces they could move, but
If they give up
like
Siakam, I don't even think that situation is much better than Portland.
right, yeah, that's my thought process. Because again, like I like what does Portland want? Because that's obviously the biggest question. Because Toronto may be able to do it. Because they have picks. If I'm not mistaken, and they do have some players that I think teams would want. It's just again, depending on how much you give up. Like you said, how much better is this situation really than Portland? I suppose because you're in the East, it's better. But is Toronto a Damian Lillard away from being like a championship team?
No.
Like I don't know. Like it's kind of how I feel about Brooklyn. Like I know a lot of people are high on a Lillard trade to Brooklyn, but I'm not quite as high on that. Like I feel like they would still be good, but it's like I don't think they'd be as good as I don't think they could beat the teams at the top of the Eastern
No.
Conference. And I understand that like just winning the championship maybe that's kind of a small or like, shorthanded or whatever mindset. But like at the same time, it's like, you know, why do that? Like, you know what I
Isn't
mean? Because like,
Lillard's goal to win a championship? I think his goal
right.
is to
So it's like,
contend.
yeah, if your goal is to win a championship, I understand it. But I think you also have to question, like, obviously it could get you closer, right? So I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that. But I just like, like I'm just looking at it from a logical perspective, right? Like if you put Damian Lillard on the Nets, right? And then like, replaced whoever you'd give up with Lillard, like do you feel like Brooklyn is a championship team? I don't think so.
No, not at
That's
all.
my yeah, like there's a reason why he wants to go to Miami,
Right.
like cuz keep in mind like, in a lot of trade requests we've seen some trade requests where they do have multiple teams, but he has one. It's not like he said I'm okay with Miami, I'm okay with Brooklyn, I'm okay with, Boston, I'm okay with, I don't know, Philly or something like that. He
Right.
said Miami. So
And there's a reason.
right, yeah, and I think the reason why is I think it makes sense if Miami got Lillard and didn't give up a lot, I think they could win the championship and they could come out of the East.
They would
I don't feel the
skyrocket
same.
to favorites.
Right, yeah, I don't feel the same way about if he went to Brooklyn or Toronto. I don't think he's quite the caliber of guy where you could put him on any team and they're a contender. I
Right.
think it's got to already be like a team that's pretty good.
Right.
And Miami, record wise wasn't great, but they did get to the finals, so clearly they were at least somewhat decent.
It's got to
So,
either be a
you know,
team where you can plug and play him and maximize what he brings to the
right,
table, or it's got to be a team that's built and constructed around him from the ground up. And,
right,
I think the best plug and play option is definitely Miami, and that's the most
yeah,
realistic one.
right. Because it's not that those teams are horrible. It's just again, I don't think he can lift them necessarily to a title necessarily.
Right.
Like
There'd
they
have to be
have
more.
those
There'd have to be more.
teams, yeah, there'd have to be more. That's how I feel about it. Because like those two teams do have like a decent defensive infrastructure where you could kind of take advantage of like, hey, he's not a great defender, but we have other good defenders, right?
Sure.
Depending on what you give up if you're Portland or excuse me, Toronto or Brooklyn, right? But like, Miami again, like we know they're not going to give up a whole lot, right? Like, because they're not going to give up Jimmy Butler, they're not going to give up Bam. Those are their two main guys. right? Everyone else is kind of plug and play, in
Right.
my opinion, for the most part. And
I
if you
agree.
replace some of those guys with Lillard, that's a championship contender to me. But I don't
Absolutely.
look at Brooklyn or Toronto in the same fashion.
Nope.
But maybe they do. Like, I don't know. Maybe
Uh,
maybe those two teams think that, but I don't know. I think if you're honest with yourself, I don't really see how you could think that. But
Two
maybe
different
that's
tiers of teams.
yeah. Maybe that's just me being, how I am.
Nope. I agree with you.
Yeah, and then the last one. So execs are skeptical on a Heald package, right? So it's the Buddy Heald trade doesn't really have a whole lot of traction. This kind of screams to me. I don't think Indiana is going to get ideally what they're looking for.
Right.
So if they're going to trade him, they're not going to get back as much as they thought. And we discussed this in the last podcast, anyways. Like I
Yes.
just don't think Heald is necessarily the caliber of player that's going to net you back like a decent return. Like because
Right.
I think he's a good player. I think he's a solid player. But is he a guy that you're going to want to, expend a lot of draft capital on? Like, I don't think so.
No.
Like, I think it's going to probably just be a player of similar ish salary and maybe like a second. I'd be really surprised if a team gave up a first unless it's got some big protections on it,
Right.
like, lottery or something like that. I'd be shocked if a team gave up an unprotected first for
Right.
Buddy Hield. Again, not a bad player, but I
Right.
don't think he's worth an unprotected first.
Yeah.
You know,
Great shooter. Great shot creator as well. Just doesn't play defense, and I think he's fine right where he is. And I think they probably won't move on from him. But if they do, yeah, they're not getting back the whole farm.
Like, I think the idea behind the trade is because they couldn't come to terms on an extension. The thought process is, well, we don't want to
Right.
lose him for nothing.
Right.
So it's like you'd rather get back something, than nothing. Because, like I said, I don't think this is a situation where, like Lillard, where it's like there's a version of a trade that's horrible, that's backbreaking, sort of, if you're
Sure.
Portland. But like, I don't expect you to get a whole lot for Buddy Hield, right? Like, I don't think there's a whole lot of different versions of this where like, oh, maybe you could get like an unprotected first in this version, and then in this other version, it's just like a second. Like I
Right.
said, I think it's either some type of protected first or a second. I don't see a team giving up a whole lot for him because, again, we've seen the trade market the last, from the deadline onwards, teams didn't give up like a whole lot to get guys, right? Like it was a lot of second round picks moving.
Mm-hmm.
But the multiple firsts were kind of saved for like the star guys. You know what I
Sure.
mean? Where it's like Buddy Hield's not a star.
Right.
He's a good player that I think can fit in well on a lot of teams. We mentioned we like, the fit on say like Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't necessarily think he's a guy that I'm moving heaven and earth to get.
No, not at all.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know in the comments, what you thought of our takes on Philadelphia and Boston. Maybe you like them, maybe you don't. But we always appreciate the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out our previous videos, covering the other teams if you haven't already done so. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.